Welcome back to Power and Purpose with me, Leon. Well, you know this script. I'm Leon Mann. He's Maro Itoje. But there's a difference this week because there's no Will. Will has deserted us. He's left us. It's just me and Maro this week. He's been playing in something called a World Cup qualifier. And the beauty of this podcast is we have obviously two current athletes. And this is just the reality. Like sometimes they're going to be away. I might have a little dinner to talk about something going on, but we're gonna miss Will, aren't we?
No, we will. We'll miss his insights, but he's serving his country. He's ensuring the Super Eagles finish strong. So, as someone of Nigerian origin, I have a vested interest in their success. So he has, I guess, slightly bigger fish to fry this time.
Yeah, and we're super proud of Will. I mean, when he scored the goal, I jumped up. I was at an event that I was doing, the football blacklist in Bristol, which was brilliant. A celebration of black people in football, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And when I saw he scored a penalty, I was just like, wow, amazing. And I was like, what? Who put Will on penalties? But obviously the Nigeria fans will know he takes a damn good penalty, that man. So very, very proud of him. And Mara, what have you been up to? What have you been up to this week?
Oh, wow. This week has been a busy week. This is my return to rugby. So this week this is the first game I'm going to play since the Lions tour. So it's been about 12 weeks, 11, 12 weeks since the last test. So yeah, it's been getting the mind and body ready for that. It's been a bit of a challenge, but all is well. I'm ready to go. It's also my 200th game. 200th game for Saracens.
Surely you're not old enough, Mauro. Surely you're not old enough. 200 for Saracens.
Yeah, 200 not out, 200 and counting. So it's been crazy. It's been a big week, and I'm looking forward to finally getting out again.
Wicked. And by the time this goes out, you would have been out there. So I'm sure everyone's reflecting on how well it went. And yeah, it's the life of a current athlete that we're bringing to you through this podcast. So it's just me and Mauro, and this is being recorded in October, which for many people, certainly those in the UK, will know is Black History Month here in the UK. So we thought it was a great opportunity to look at the Black community and sport and what this Black History Month actually is and means. Because when I've been out and about, and people have, let me say, they don't have a filter in the same way when you see people in real life as opposed to maybe through social media, etc. So they're coming up to me and sharing their feedback on the pod, which is all pretty good actually, which is fantastic. But they're also sharing opinions like, why do we need a Black History Month? What is this? Like, it's Black History every month. And I thought that was a really interesting question because, of course, like, Black history doesn't just arrive for October, right? Where are you on this, Mara?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting conversation and topic. Yeah, I guess the argument follows that why would you have a single month to talk about Black history when Black history is part of British history? So it should be just like every other month. And to some respect, that is true. That is true. But on a different vein, I guess the whole reason why Black History Month came to be was because Black history wasn't given the significance or the credence that other history was given, whether that is Black history within Britain, whether that is world history relating to the African continent. And I guess Black History is just a month to celebrate Black history and not just talk about Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. Because when I was growing up, the only parts of Black history that I learned in school was Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement and the slave trade. It's as if there was no other contribution to history apart from those two events. And of course, those two events are important and worthy to be studied, and so they should be. But so is the tremendous history that is there in the African continent, or some of the wonderful inventions that Black people have done and contributed to society at large over a period of time. So personally, I'm not mad at it. I'm not mad at Black History Month. I think it's important for it to be highlighted until we see the change that we want to see.
Absolutely, I'm on the same page. I'm as viewers will visibly see much older than you. I say much older. Yeah, I'm older than yourself, and we're not going to get into that too much, given that you've got the nickname Unk because of the anyway. So, but I am the elder statesman of the PMP podcast, and certainly when I was at school, there was absolutely nothing really. And to now see my children, my 9-year-old, come in and educate me, quite frankly, educate me on Black history when she's at primary school, and my eldest at 14 come and talk to me about all the brilliant things she's learned at school really is a shift forward. But equally, I can understand why people are annoyed because clearly it comes from a feeling of, well, it's October. Now you're going to ask me to do a talk, and now you're going to engage with Black history. Where were you in March? And where were you in September? And why are you not calling me anymore? Now it's November the 1st. So I understand that energy. And I think it's something that we need to acknowledge as part
Mm.
of this discussion. I think it's important to do that.
Yeah, and I also think I completely understand why it would be perceived to be annoying because, like, if an organization, a company, a school for 1 month talk about Black history and for 1 month pay special importance to it and highlight all the, I guess, the positive and negative things that are happening in and around Black history or society at large, whether that is racism, diversity, inclusion, etc., then if their actions don't marry that up for the rest of the year, it kind of seems as if they're just paying lip service to it. So that is definitely what we want to guard against. We want,
Mm.
I guess, with Black History, what we want is a month where significance is placed on it, but then it is consistent throughout the year in terms of the credence, the respect, the just basically how they live their lives is marries up with what they say.
Yeah, and I have to say, like my experience of not having much Black history taught when I was at school, as I said, is markedly different to my 9-year-old. And my 9-year-old isn't just talking about in October, but it's an elevated conversation in October. So it does give me some sense of optimism, but clearly that's not the case for many people from Black communities and other communities who are highlighting this as well up and down the country. So I'm hoping that there is a shift very soon.
And what does that look like from your 9-year-old out of interest? Like, because 9 is still pretty young. So if she's coming to you and telling you, how would you contrast that with your upbringing
Oh,
in the 80s?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, the 80s, it feels a long time. It feels a long time ago, but yes, she's coming home and she's very curious and excited about sharing parts of Black history. And there are times, not all the time, because let's face it, I mean, I'm working in this space, so if I didn't know about Black history at all, it would be really worrying, right? But there are times when I'm hitting Google to kind of go, I need to double check this is the person I'm thinking about because there's a lot of assumed knowledge sometimes, and you find yourself going, oh no, actually, that's not the right person. That's completely somebody else. And that wasn't the person who I'm thinking of. So the fact that she's coming back and the fact that when I go into a school for a parents' evening, I'm seeing these figures like up on the walls and it's not just for October, and it's not a Black History Month project. For me, is how it should be. And look, we're in a diverse part of London, so there are many children, many communities from absolutely all over the world that are settled in this particular part of North London. So it's kind of how it should be, right? And I'd like to hope that if someone was at a school in Norwich, they would still have access to understanding Black history and not just the elements we've touched on in terms of slavery and trauma and great things like the civil rights movement, of course, but Black joy, and that was something I was going to move us onto in that regard, because I don't want this podcast to be about reflecting on what's bad, what's not good. That's part of the conversation. Another part of the conversation should always be, who are the Black people that inspired us and got us out of bed and made us go, wow, I'm going to do something amazing today. I've got sports related things written down in front of me, but I don't know. Is there any particular Black figure that comes to mind for you, Mauro, when you think about someone that inspired you or that you think about?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm actually gonna, there's a few people who come to mind, but I'm actually gonna talk about someone who is not in the sporting world, and that's Kwame Nkrumah, President Kwame Nkrumah.
Mm,
So he was the first president of Ghana, led Ghana out of colonialism in 1957, if I remember correctly. And he was just an incredibly, I don't know how the words to describe it. He was just an
mm,
incredibly inspirational figure. He his rhetoric and his talk and language around like the pride that Ghanaians must feel, and not only Ghanaians. He was a big pan African, so he was talking about the pride of the continent and how for Ghanaians and Africans to truly have control of their lives, they need to have control of their societies, and only when that is established, then they'll be able to flourish. And his his whole campaign for Ghanaian independence, I just think he was super inspirational. He was a very impressive guy, very articulate, and he was someone, especially as I was digging deeper into like African history and African politics, he was someone who I drew huge inspiration from.
mm. I'm going to talk about Bob Marley. It's
Mm.
a bit of a predictable one because, I'm of Jamaican heritage.
So basically, Leon, the Jamaican person of the podcast is talking about Bob Marley, and the
Hang
African
on.
person's talking. Well, at least I'm Nigerian, and
You-
I'm talking
You're talking
about
about a Ghanaian. You're talking
Ghanaian,
about
which
a
is
Ghanaian. I was going to say that is progressive, shall we say? But in terms of Bob Marley, why Bob Marley? Okay, yes, I just love the messaging, peace and love, etc. But for someone of mixed heritage, and I describe myself as Black of mixed heritage, as we discussed in this podcast before. Actually, to identify with someone, and look, interestingly, Bob never described himself as mixed heritage. And to people around him, they say, if you were to say that, you'd get a box on the nose, because in terms of how he identified, it was almost like, I'm a Black man, but this is about unity, love, peace. We're all human beings, right? So he didn't really get into the whole I'm Black and I'm white, etc. He didn't really do that. And actually, as a young person of mixed heritage, that kind of gave a lot of clarity in some ways in terms of the identity I had myself, rightly or wrongly. But because of his messaging about positivity, peace, love, everything he embodied and represented, and his messaging through his music, I couldn't help but feel a big connection to him. So my bedroom walls as a young person were filled with posters of Bob Marley and Paul Gascoigne and Gary Lineker, right? So it was the right kind of like mix up. But that figurehead was Bob Marley for me. I guess talking about someone else who's outside of sport, Lord Herman Ouseley, who I worked with. So Lord Herman Ouseley, the founder of the Kick Racism Out of Football campaign, he was a significant Black leader that I had kind of worked with. And I'd grown up in an area of North London where there was a politician called Bernie Grant, who I used to get my haircut in the same barber as him. So I'd see him around and be kind of like in awe, because of just the presence of the man and just his significance as a politician during the 80s. But Lord Ouseley, I mean, was the most terrifying person I'd ever been on the phone with as a young person entering the world of work. It was something that I'll never forget, and that was the making of me, because it was like, look, just get on with it. What are you calling me for? Kind of vibe. But it came from a place of love and authority. And very sadly, he passed away last year. And I've got to know his son since really well. He's a brilliant guy. And I just feel that close connection to Lord Ouseley. So I wanted to give him a shout out during Black History Month, and we'll continue shouting him out every single month. Maro, I don't know if there's any athletes or if you had somebody else your side outside of the athlete world.
Yeah, so out or inside the athlete world is perhaps and possibly the greatest athlete of all time, and that is Muhammad Ali. I absolutely adore that man. He is an incredible person, and the reason why I adore him is not because of what he did in the ring. Yeah, I was about to say on the field, but not what he did in the ring. But what he did outside of the ring was, in my view, like equally, if not more impressive. How articulate he was, how proud he was to be a black man at a time where it was not very popular. It wasn't the to be black was came with a lot of negative baggage, and he rejected that line of thinking and that thought processes, and he was totally proud, totally articulate, incredibly smart, and just stood up for what he believed in, even when it wasn't popular, even when the country, the press were calling him all sorts of names. They threatened to put him in jail and did put him in jail. He sacrificed the height of his boxing career. In my view, he spent the years he spent in jail were meant to be his peak years. He would have earned so much money if he was allowed to box during that time, but he let that all go for his principles, and that's incredibly impressive from my point of view. When you have a man whose convictions are so strong and rooted in things that are unbelievably important in his heart. And not only that, he's a three-time world heavyweight champion. He razzle dazzled us. He almost broke the stereotype of what an athlete should be and how they should act. And there's loads of lessons to pick up and learn from him. So he's definitely my number one athlete.
Amazing. I've got two people written down here. One's going to be a bit of a surprise, but the first one, we've got to shout out our sisters as well, right? So Serena Williams, the way she dominates or dominated her sport is just incredible. And I was very lucky enough in my job back in the day as a producer to actually make a piece with Serena on her at Wimbledon, which was just incredible. And I felt a connection with her when I was working with her, and I feel that was because at the time it wasn't a very diverse group of people who were working for this particular broadcaster at the time. And when I walked into the room, I could just tell. I could just tell straight off. It was like, oh, who's this? Like, this is different. This feels, and I was equally, look, I'm here, and this means a hell of a lot to me. So we kind of, for that very short window of 10 minutes, formed what I felt was like a really good connection. And I ended up making the piece that previewed the Wimbledon final that she went on to win, one of the many Wimbledon finals that she went on to win. And that felt really special. It's just the way that she's been herself. She's been on the front foot. She's been unapologetic. Like, I love that. I really, really love that. And I think it's much harder to be that way as a black woman. I would say that with full confidence, and I'm happy for people to kind of come at me in the comments and debate it. But I feel as a black woman, it is harder in this world. So for her to dominate her sport in the way that she did, remain true to herself, and go on to now be an investor in all sorts of different things, I just think this is a phenomenal human being that we won't see many of like that in the future. And the other one, and this is where, Dad, if you're listening, put your fingers in your ears. As a Tottenham fan, I've always admired Ian Wright. And I know I'm going to get hammered by my Tottenham supporter mates now. But the thing I loved about Ian Wright, the thing I love about Ian Wright now, he was just so authentic. When he scored the goals he scored, which I was like, damn, Arsenal scored another goal, but he'd do the celebration. And it was just like that celebration just tells me a lot about London, a lot about an identity, a lot about blackness that I connect with. And I don't know. I mean, I certainly don't feel he was doing it deliberately. And I've been lucky enough to spend some time around Ian Wright, and have never plucked up the courage to actually ask him about it. But it just felt like, wow, this guy is owning his identity and is not trying to fit in with anyone right now. He's just him doing him. And wow, isn't he a brilliant sports person to go along with it? So shout out Ian Wright. I'm not going to say you were an inspiration to me because as a Tottenham fan, you absolutely weren't. And I remember you celebrating in front of me as a kid in with the Tottenham fans. And yeah, it wasn't nice. So yeah, shout out Ian Wright.
One thing for sure is that Ian Wright has had a generation of the black community in this country on chokehold. He's connected, he's connected the black community to Arsenal, and I was probably watching football just after his generation. I was
Mm,
more the Nelka, Thierry Henry sort of
Thierry.
generation, but probably the reason why I'm an Arsenal fan is because of my dad, and my dad was a huge Ian Wright fan.
Yeah, Ian Wright, right. I think it was. I've never been able to sing it because, as a Tottenham fan, that would just not be right. But you know,
Pun intended.
he's different, and as a broadcaster, I think he's exceptional as well. You know, he's just bringing something different to the table and just owning it. So big up to him. Mara, I'd like to move it on to representation, right? Because my world working in football is largely around looking at how we improve leadership in football and in different sports and in the media. And one of the things I truly believe in, based on the McKinsey report of many years ago, that said diverse groups perform better. So that's not an opinion. That is backed up with academic research. So the thought that diverse groups, and diverse in its broadest sense, right? So your working class person from Newcastle is part of the diversity of a group. Of course they are, right? In the same way, your middle class guy from Nigeria is part of the makeup of a diverse group of people. So diverse groups are proven to perform better. However, when we look at the context of sport, and I'm going to use the example of football and men's football because that's the area I know best. Like 43% of Premier League players are of Black heritage. This is according to the Black Footballers Partnership, who've done some incredible research around this. So 43%. There's another academic out there who's telling me it's much higher in terms of the percentage he's seen since that report has been done. So 43% of players in the Premier League are black. However, there are just 2 black board members across the 20 clubs. And if we look at the managers, we've got Nuno, who's in at West Ham, so just 1 black manager. So, what does that tell us? And what's the message essentially from that and those stats about where black people are as athletes versus where black people are as leaders?
Well, I think there's a few things that you could take from that. I guess the first general observation is that black people are comfortable, and I guess from a societal point of view, they're comfortable to be seen as the talent, as the athlete, and that probably fits in with some old school stereotypes of black people. Fast, strong, athletic, etc., which has been the case for a very long time. And the other part of it is for some reason they're not managing to get onto the other side, and the other side of the coin, which is, I guess, the business side of football, particularly in C-suite executives, on the boardroom level, running clubs, etc. And I'm as with everything, nothing is as simple as it sounds, but it's probably a strong indication that there's some sort of bias that probably exists, because there's definitely black people who are qualified, there's definitely black people who are capable, there are definitely black people who are willing, but for one reason or the other they're not getting to that to those places and being invited into those rooms. And I think it's a good thing that we're conscious of it. It's a good thing that we're able to talk about this and probably raise a light and shine a light on these things. But it's definitely something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, because I mean, I guess there are some people who will be listening to this podcast and going, "Well, hang on, guys, like you're spotlighting football, but let's have a look at the city. Let's have a look at the big law firms. Let's have a look at like education. Let's have a look across all different areas of society, and there's a similar issue." So I think it's fair to say that football isn't alone in terms of a lack of representation from the black community. I think that's fair to say, and if anyone wishes to challenge that, get in the comments because we'd love to see that viewpoint to understand it some more. But
I feel like
it's it,
Sorry, I feel like you're right. Football isn't alone, but I feel like given the disparity between the number of athletes who play and then on the business side, it feels wider than, and this is a very subjective feeling, so I might be wrong here, but it feels like the disparity is wider in football than it is in some of the other fields that you mentioned. Um, there's a lot of senior black lawyers. There's a lot of senior black businessmen. Perhaps not as proportionate as one would like, but they're still in those fields. But it feels like in football, for a particular reason, there's a stronger sense of it being more difficult. I wonder what your observations are on that.
yeah, well, Maro, you beat me to it, mate. You keep doing this. You keep taking the point I'm about to make. But no, in terms of the point you're making, I completely agree. And I've been thinking deeply about this for such a long time. It's the world that I'm in, right? I mean, if you look at the Premier League, it is a global league, right? So when we talk about black people, people from underrepresented backgrounds, etc., we often refer to people, as I've just done it, underrepresented backgrounds, but we don't use the term global majority, which is being used largely when we're talking about people of color now. We talk about people from the global majority. So there could be an argument to say, well, actually, it's a global league, so this is representative of the global majority. And I'm playing devil's advocate by just kind of like throwing these points out there to make sure that what we're discussing is kind of thorough around this point. I think there's some uncomfortable parts around the encouragement of black people to be athletes. Certainly, I can talk from a personal perspective that maybe I was the first choice for the football team, but when I was in the classroom academically, I wasn't the person who was thought of in the first instant to answer that question. So, if you are seen and perceived in a particular way and encouraged in a particular way, then you can sometimes end up in a particular direction. Be that there's lots of black rappers. I know that's used as a thing. I'm not completely convinced by that, but certainly are there lots of black footballers? Yes. As a young black person, are you encouraged into becoming a young black footballer before you're encouraged to become a young black lawyer? Question. Now, that could be something to do with the representation that we see, because if you look at the England national football team, consistently for the last 3-4 squads that have gone to the major international tournaments, half have been, and this is men's football, half have been from black heritage. So there's definitely something going on there. And the to your point in terms of the gap and the opportunity to become more diverse in leadership, I absolutely agree with that, because I think there's a pathway from being an athlete, from being a footballer in this case, if it is managed properly and appropriately, and there's a desire, then you have a larger pool of people within your profession, potentially, to move into leadership positions, be that coaches and managers, sporting director, CEO, etc., etc. But those things haven't been done or haven't been thought about as intentionally as I feel they should be. I also feel that football very much looks down into itself, and sport looks down into itself and says, well, there aren't many people to lead at this point in time. Whereas I think when they're thinking of white candidates, they look left and right. So they look to the city, they look to the world of law, they look to the world of business, and then they find people there and bring them into the space, as opposed to just looking at, well, what have we got within the pool that we're fishing in at the moment? So I think it's a real fascinating um, area. And Maro, I'm interested because obviously Tom Alube was the chair at England Rugby. You had Nigel Walker as the interim CEO at Welsh Rugby. Is rugby sorted? Does rugby not have this issue?
No, rugby is definitely not sorted. Whilst whilst I guess there's been some big moves forward, Tom Alube, who was previously the chair of England Rugby, and Nigel Walker, who was previously the CEO of Wales Rugby. So that's two big jobs held by black men. But as with all these things, that's obviously good, and it was great to have that sort of representation there. But there's that's two organizations out of, I don't know, 200, 300, 400. I don't know how many clubs we have. Probably have about 1900 rugby clubs in Britain. So it's definitely a problem in rugby. But I feel like rugby has a slightly different issue to football, because probably up until this current generation of players, whilst there's always been black rugby players, there's always been the guys like my uncle, who's Andrew Harriman, or Steve Ajomo, Victor Bogu, Martin Ofaya from the 80s and 90s. There's always been black people who've played rugby. However, with the type of black people who've been playing rugby, I don't think there's been a strong desire for them to enter the coaching world. Whilst there's been some who've had that feeling and that have gone on to do it, I don't think there's been a strong desire, as there is in football with a lot of the black players who now retire and they want to go into coaching. And on top of that, a lot of the black players historically who've played rugby, I think they want to do other things. They want to either go into the city or do business or do whatever endeavors they want, which is not necessarily in the realm of rugby. So there may have been some of those issues if they pursued executive jobs in rugby or coaching jobs in rugby. But I feel like this current generation of players is the first generation where there's probably more black players in the league
Mm.
across various age groups. There's more black players, and there's probably going forward going to be a stronger desire for these black players to contribute to the game post rugby, whether that's at the executive level or whether that's in the coaching box or the analysts, etc., etc. Yeah, I think it's slightly different to football in that respect. But I also think it was an interesting point you raised with where we as black people place importance to our kids or our children, or as a society at where we place importance, because naturally we all love football, we all love professional sport, and perhaps the dream of any young boy or girl is to be a professional athlete in their given sport. We watch it on TV, we idolize it, we aspire to be it, so perhaps that comes with naturally. So especially with football, as it's the dominant sport in this country, there's a natural inclination to want to be a part of that. But for a lot of communities, there wouldn't be that natural desire to be a lawyer or to be a doctor or to I guess be a poet or be a scientist or some of these other industries which are just as valuable and but just require I guess a different skill set. And I think some communities do it really well. I know I'm obviously a little bit biased here again, but Nigerians, like, for example, in my family, my parents knew nothing about rugby. They wanted me to be a doctor, an accountant, maybe an engineer, any professional qualification. That's what they wanted. They didn't really care about rugby. And I know other communities do that well as well. But I think as a society, if we start to place a much higher importance on some of these valuable careers and these valuable industries outside of sport, it's likely that our future generations will want to be a part of that in a much higher number.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting point because I guess I was looking at it the other way in terms of, well, if you're seen from the outside as your identity fits more with being an athlete, then people don't invest in you in other ways.
Mm,
Um, and I think that can be deeply problematic. However, I also do agree that we need to increase the knowledge and understanding of pathways into different roles within our communities and do a better job of that. And that was kind of my thinking behind the football blacklist, because for those listening going, what's this football blacklist business, right? So this football blacklist that I and Rodney Hines, the editor of the Voice newspaper here in the UK, came up with was really to kind of say, look at all the different jobs you can do in football and look at all the different black people that are working in all these different jobs. So if you're a young kid from the black community and you're thinking, I love football, but you're not going to become a footballer because it's very hard to become a footballer, but you have a talent and could go on to become a doctor, why don't you become the doctor for Arsenal Football Club? Why don't you become the business manager for Leighton Orient? Why don't you keep that connection with this sport that you love, but find different pathways in? And actually, on this list, you can see people who've come from similar backgrounds, similar places to yourself, who have done it, and who are connection points to say you can go into these different areas. So that's the kind of contribution that I wanted to make from a grassroots position. And now football is beginning to do a better job in this area in terms of talking about those different pathways in. All those young players, black and white, who don't make it, where do they go? Because they've invested so much of their lives, so much energy into a particular profession, and then they're told, sorry, that's it, there's the door. Now clubs are beginning to do a much better job in terms of directing people into different pathways, and I really hope that some of those pathways will lead to the 16-year-old who's been rejected walking out, going to get a great education, and then returning as the CEO of the club one day. That, for me, I would love to see that, particularly from the black community, because we are so underrepresented given this huge contribution we're making to the game. And I think that applies to many other sports: boxing, athletics, rugby. As we're saying, we'd like to see more representation. But if we're waiting for these things, in my view, to happen organically, we'll be waiting for another 20, 30, 40 years, and there'll be some other people sat here doing a different podcast, probably with AI presenters, talking about the same issues, right? And that would be unforgivable, and I can't allow that to happen, or at least I'm not going to sit here and not do as much as I can in this space, because we can make a change, but we have to be really intentional on it. And having access to people like Mark Bullingham, who is the CEO of the FA, Richard Masters, the CEO of the Premier League, I have these conversations with those leaders, and they would like to see more representation, and they would like to see better performance from all businesses across their sport. And I believe they believe in what we're talking about. It's just the how. How do you do it? How do you deliver change that increases business performance according to all the academic research that exists out there to say greater diversity means better business? So a big challenge, but I feel athletes play a big part of what the future should look like.
Let's touch on that a little bit. So, you're in this space, you advise the likes of the people who you just mentioned. So, what is the how? How would you recommend people, organizations, clubs take that step?
Well, at the moment, what I see is a broken system. So people are getting jobs because of who they know and the circles that they move within. So if you have this ecosystem of leaders, brilliant leaders, I'm not questioning the quality of all the leaders, certainly. There's a couple of dodgy ones in there, but every industry has those, right? So you have this ecosystem, but this ecosystem does not actively um, reach out to people from outside of people with particular identities. So it lacks women, it lacks Black people, it lacks Asian people, it lacks people from the LGBT community, it lacks people with disabilities. So this ecosystem exists, but this is the ecosystem where people get jobs. So what you need to do with this system is you need to change it. And you need to change that by actively doing intentional things to bring people into that space. Now, some people would say, yeah, but there's not good enough people. And I would say, I don't believe that. You have to be intentional in going to find them. So when I've been networking with CEOs of huge companies, I'm saying to them, has anyone reached out to you to say, would you be interested in doing something within the football industry? And they've said, well, no. And I said, are you interested in football? And they say, yeah, I really am interested. And I get approaches from other industries, but not necessarily the football industry or the sports industry. So for me, that's low hanging fruit. Can we bring brilliant leaders together to be part of that ecosystem while we're fixing the bigger problem, which is why this ecosystem, it remains so static and isn't as open and inclusive to leaders of all backgrounds, which is the bigger problem. But that bigger problem is going to take 50 years, in my opinion, to change. And I ain't got 50 years to watch this keep happening. So we have to cheat it a little bit, and we have to intentionally bring people together. And I don't even see it as cheating. I just see it as like going out to do something with real intention, and trying to do things differently, which is what's needed. Because if you do the same thing, we'll still be waiting for Black CEOs, Black directors, etc., and hoping that there's some 15-year-old kid now about to leave a academy that ends up in 15 years having an interest in leadership, having been involved in the game. It's a bet, and we can't rely on bets. We've got to have some kind of strategy together. So I'm pleased to say there's an openness to these discussions and to these ideas. We have to see them work before they begin to be scaled up. So I'm hopeful. And if there are any CEOs in business outside of football that have an interest in football or sport, rugby, please do reach out, because I would love to get to know you, and I would love to introduce you into my networks, where there can be potential opportunities, because that's how it's working for everybody else.
So let me play devil's advocate here.
Okay.
Uh, so what about to the people listening and hearing what you said and being like, no, that's not fair. You're then ruining the chances of all people, regardless of their background. We just want the best talent. We don't want to discriminate against someone because they're black, white, Asian, brown, blue, purple. We just want the best talent, and doing what you're saying is discriminating against, I guess, the majority of people in this country.
Well, I would say we recruit in the best image of ourselves. So if the people who are largely the people who are doing the recruiting are white men, certainly men, and they're recruiting in the best image of themselves, then we know what potentially is going to turn up. But equally, I'd also say, is scouting unfair? So football clubs go and scout for the best talent that they can find. Is that unfair? Is it unfair that they would go for the left-footed player because they can see that their football club actually really requires a good left-footed player with some pace that can also tackle? It's about understanding what you need. And if we go back to the principle that I was talking about with the McKinsey report, to say diverse groups perform better, then actually that's the principle that we're talking about. So it's not to say that someone cannot be given a job or a role. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's just like where we have a complete lack of representation of particular people, in the same way we'd have in a sports team a lack of particular people who can do particular things, then you would go about trying to find the things that make that team stronger. So that's exactly what this is. If there was a football team that everyone was left-footed and everyone was good at defending, it wouldn't be a great football team. And equally, I could give you a rugby analogy, but it would be a bit weird doing that with you. So I hope people understand the point I'm making, because I think when people hear about diversity and inclusion, they what they sometimes hear is not me. That's not me. And actually it is, because if there was a group of people that were working together and they were all of mixed heritage from North London and looked and sounded a bit like me, that's not a diverse group of people. We need some white men in there. So that is the way I would encourage people to look at diversity. That is not just talking about people who look and sound like me, but it's actually acknowledging that people who look and sound like me and yourself, Mauro, and many others, have been excluded without people maybe even knowing. And some people have known, let's face it. So how do we redress those issues, in the name of what I'm saying is not feeling fluffy about, oh, it's great, I've got black people around my table, but better business performance, because that's what these academic reports are telling us. That's what all the evidence suggests. So this is not just an opinion. This is actually based on some kind of research that has led us to understand that better performance comes from diverse groups.
And I think it's an important thing to note when we talk about diversity. It's not just of background or ethnicity. So you can have a diverse group, but if they all think the same way, or if they all come from the same school, is it really that diverse? Probably not. So the diversity of thought, as well as the diversity of background, diversity of class, diversity of where you live, etc. I think all of those things makes teams more robust. All of those things makes teams have more touch points and can relate to the wider society better.
I totally agree, and I think that's the way we need to look at these things. And I myself, I will always hold my hands up and say I've got things wrong, because I think in the past I've got things wrong where the way I've delivered messages around this subject have just led to some very important, influential people who could have actually brought about change not listening, because what they're feeling is my energy, and they're not hearing the actual argument for change and why it actually makes a lot of sense and why it will actually help the performance of their business. If we called this not EDI and called it make more money through better performance, then a lot more people would come to the meetings, a lot more people would engage in the content, a lot more people would come to the conferences, because it's one of my bugbears that when I'm speaking at conferences, I do this now. And this might mean I don't get many bookings, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. I say, how many CEOs or chairs are in this room? And sometimes few hands go up, often not many, sometimes none. Now, it might be I'm not senior enough in the industry for CEOs and chairs to turn up, but when we're talking about how seriously are you taking these issues, like you need to send your top people to be in those rooms. And I'm not expecting them to be absolutely everything. And there might be some consultants looking at performance who say, oh, no, I have all the CEOs, I have all the chairs in the rooms. They're all engaged. But I just feel like if it was called come and make more money, there would be a queue at the door and half them CEOs and chairs wouldn't get in the room. The room wouldn't be big enough. And actually, that's what I feel we're talking about. We're talking about performance of businesses, performances of teams, but it's just not seen that way because the energy has been about what people are not getting. And I think people find it hard to hear that when they feel responsible. So if you're not finding this interesting, I'm going to shift it into a space where you might do, and hopefully you have found it interesting. I'd be disappointed if you didn't find what
They
we're
found it
talking about
interesting. They
at
found it
least
interesting.
interesting. I mean, we're giving a lot of ourselves here, and look, I've got to say, like, when you're talking about these issues, sometimes you can feel heavily scrutinized. Sometimes you can feel that there's a pressure on you from either your community or your industry to say particular things. And I think that's been holding us back. And that takes me on to an interesting thing that's been in the news recently, where Luther Burrell, who, of course, is in the rugby world, I know him well, really good guy in my experience of him, great guy, who very bravely spoke out about the racism that he'd faced in rugby. He called out racism in a very public way after kind of reporting it. And this week he said it's cost him his rugby career. Now, that's incredibly sad. And that can't be the case in 2025, that when people call out things that they feel, they experience, leads to them feeling like that's the end of their career. And I've spoken to many footballers about this. I've heard many footballers and many people from other industries feel the same. We need to find some solutions here because this can't keep happening. We can't keep having martyrs in our sports, in our industries, who feel like they have no other option. Because that's, I mean, people don't speak out just because it's the first thing that comes to their minds. They often try everything in terms of raising the alarm, going through all the processes, etc. It's when they feel let down that they actually go out there and say, right, I have to share my truth publicly because people need to know. But how do we stop that, Maro? How do we um, make sure that people are better looked after when they have complaints and have negative experiences?
Well, the prerequisite to any of that is education. I think understanding what people say and what it means and the impact that can have. You know, I'm no saint. Maybe when I was growing up, we used to joke about things which I would never joke about now because because I understand what it means and I understand that it was harmful and offensive. And I think a lot of people don't understand the seriousness to what they say. They don't understand the impact of what they say, and it can be laughed off as, "Oh, I didn't really mean it like that," or "Oh, I was just having a joke," or "Oh, come on, where's your sense of humor," etc., etc. But these things can have an effect, and especially when you are the minority in these spaces, when it's maybe you or just you, or maybe there's one or two of you in the squad. And often being a black person playing rugby in this country, you're definitely one of the minority. And things are you're often by yourself in those environments. So I think the first thing is education. um, then after that, it's, as with everything, is leadership. Is leadership
Mm.
from people at the top. uh, when the leaders take things seriously, then things change off the back of that. I can't speak too closely on Luther's experiences,
Mm.
but it definitely comes down to good quality leadership, because when your leaders take a stand and make things important, that flows down, whether it's sports team, whether it's a club, an organization, or even the government. When the leaders take the initiative, it trickles down to the rest of us.
What do we need to do for leaders to take this more seriously in sport? And I don't want to put you on the spot in rugby, particularly because, well, I don't know. I mean, do you feel a more diverse leadership in rugby, a more diverse leadership in sport generally, will help to address these things? And that's not me suggesting it's black people's job to sort racism out, but do you think diverse groups will help in the leadership and education space?
Well, I think diverse groups help in every space, whether it's leadership, whether it's diversity, whether it's, as you said, making money, or like, diverse groups help teams become more robust, organizations become more robust. They cover the blind spots when you have a diverse group of, when you've got that group think kind of mentality, then you're
Mm.
blind to so many things. So diverse groups definitely help. As I said, I think there's a big education piece in and around um, what is and isn't acceptable. And I remember during the pandemic and around 2020, this was when Black Lives Matter came about, and
Mm.
I think people would just had a heightened awareness of the things they said, and perhaps some of the jokes they've made, which were not really responsible. And I had amazing conversations with my teammates who were asking me questions. Oh, is this okay to say? If oh, it's not okay to say. Why isn't it okay to say? And I think that they're the conversations that are that we need to have. Often there's there's a stigma and shame because people don't want to be considered racist, and rightly so. I would hope
Mm.
no one wants to be considered
Mm.
racist. But in order for us to have frank and meaningful conversations, some of these things needs to be discussed. Some of these things need to be talked about, because I genuinely believe most people in their hearts are kind, lovely people, but you will have blind spots. You would have been socially conditioned to think a certain type of way or whatever, which may materialize in making some remarks which are not okay. And the way we move forward is about having good faith conversations in and around these spaces, and understanding as a collective, as a society, how we can move forward in a progressive manner where we're not isolating people. Obviously, there's gonna have to be red lines somewhere, because you can't just talk off or shrug off certain actions and behaviors, and you can't tolerate certain things. However, as I think there's a good faith nature to these conversations as well.
I want to shift it back to representation as we come towards the end of the podcast, because it's something that's just occurred to me. Because we're talking about leadership positions. I'm talking about CEO. I'm talking about chair. I'm talking about the head coach. I'm not talking about the captain. So once upon a time, there weren't many black captains across British sport at all. And as someone who walks into rooms as the only black person often in the business of sport, in my roles in football and the sports media, there can be a pressure that I feel. And that pressure is, well, I'm the black guy, so I'm representing a hell of a lot of people right now. And that actually is a very unfair feeling to bring into a meeting. However, it is how it is. But for you, Mauro, as the captain of England, the captain of the Lions, is there ever a time you think, as a black guy, wow, I better not get this wrong?
Yeah, well, I try and not think like that. um, I guess I'm acutely aware that I hold, you know, I guess three very prestigious offices: Captain of Saracens, Captain of England, and Captain of the British and Irish Lions. And it's an absolute honor and dream to hold all of those positions, and I have no doubt that there will be people young of all backgrounds looking at me and looking how I behave and how I conduct myself. And yeah, it's I guess it's a responsibility, but it's also a privilege. It's also a privilege. And I'm also acutely aware that in order for not only for me to be successful in those positions, but in order for some negative connotations and stereotypes to follow when I, hang up my boots and retire or move on from these roles, it's important also for me to try and do a good job in those roles. But there's I think it's important because you can only really control yourself. You can only really control your actions, your behaviors, how you conduct yourself. Playing sport, there's a whole number of things that are outside of your control. And with the best will in the world, you can you have very little bearing on it. So, and I think what helps me in that endeavor is having a strong sense of who I am, having a strong sense of my values, and being authentic. Because I think when you're authentic, you have a strong sense of who you are, you know what your values are, you know what you will and won't accept, you know what you stand for, then I think when you make decisions, you can stand firm in those decisions, and you know you're built on solid rock as opposed to built on sand. Um, and yeah, it comes with the territory. It comes with the territory. I guess it may at times feel like a lot, but all in all, it's a huge honor and something that I'm incredibly grateful for.
Well, Mauro, in this podcast series, I might not get a chance to say this, but thank you. Thank you for leading in the way that you do, because I think sometimes we all, as Black leaders, maybe don't realize the impact we're having on the people that will follow us. And, when I think about the people who've come before me, the impact they had on me, the Bernie Grants, the Lord Ousleys, etc., that we talked about at the top of the pod, they really did help to inspire me to think that I could go on to become something and someone who can do something interesting in this world. So, this isn't the Black Power and Purpose podcast. So we'll be talking, obviously, very generally about leadership. So this is my opportunity to say thank you to you, Maro, for what you've done for this country. And of course, you're not done, man. You've got plenty more to come. Plenty,
Yes,
as they
sir.
say in
Yes,
Jamaica.
sir.
So
Thank you.
that's all we've got time for, unfortunately. I feel like we could talk for another hour around the complexities and the different spaces around what it means to be Black, a person of color, in sport in the UK, particularly at this time. So I hope you found what we've been talking about interesting and informative. We've tried to give as much as we can within this space. I certainly feel almost like physically quite tired by the conversation. But let us know what you think about the conversation. We're learning. We're learning. We're learning from you. We hope you're learning something from these conversations. Remember, you can jump into our WhatsApp group. Yes, really, you can jump into our WhatsApp group. So please do that. We'd love to see you within our WhatsApp group. Get subscribing, following on socials, commenting, sharing, liking. Trust me, we see it all, and we really do appreciate every single interaction. This has been Power and Purpose. Take care, and we look forward to connecting next time.